Welcome to the Living the Dream podcast with Curveball. If you believe, you can achieve. Welcome to the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, a show where I interview guests that teach, motivate, and inspire. Today, I am joined by seasoned entrepreneur and real estate expert, as well as author and former city commissioner, Kevin Hypes. Kevin has spent years navigating business growth and community impact. So we're going to be talking to him about that. He also is in the mental health space. So we'll be talking to him about everything that he's up to and gonna be up to. So Kevin, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Why don't you start off by telling everybody a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am, I've been around a long time. I'm almost 70. And I've lived a very interesting life and done many interesting things. So I just finished my book. It's called Book of Me, The Life and Times of Kevin Hypes, the New York Forrest Gump. And you're probably saying, well, what does he mean by that? Well, basically what it means is that I've done so many different things over the last 6, 7 decades that I guess I feel like I'm a bit of a Forrest Gump. A lot of interesting stories. I've been a storyteller all my life, and many people have told me that I should write a book because of the many stories that I tell. And I didn't think I could do that because I'm too busy and I don't have the patience. But what I did was I started a YouTube channel called Planet Hypes. And I told my stories into the camera. And believe it or not, in about 6 months, I had about 70 stories. I downloaded it to a manuscript and I ended up with a 500-page book. So I'm kind of proud of that. But most of all, I like helping people. I do a lot of different things. I am a real estate professional by trade. But I've also had some solid ups and downs, and I've conquered many of my fears and made many mistakes along the way. And basically, that has turned me into a man who's not afraid to go forward, who enjoys the journey. It's not really about money. It's about helping others. It's about being successful in a way that improves the life of the folks around me. And it's just all about the journey. That's kind of what I say. So there's various things I've done and various topics that I could speak about. And I guess I'll leave that open to you. But if you want, I can give you a quick rundown of all the crazy things I've done. I'll ask you to decide how you want to proceed on that.
Well, what I was gonna say is, you've done real estate, you've been a city commissioner, you've also been a garage band musician. So, yeah, give us a quick rundown of all the things you've done and how they all tie together. And then
Cool.
we'll ask you about them individually, especially the city commissioner and the musician.
Great. That's great. Well, I'm a street kid from Queens. Never went to college. I was a hippie, a factory worker with a long hair and a ponytail. Went to a lot of those outdoor rock concerts. Back in the 70s, that was kind of the thing to do. But then eventually I got into a real rock and roll band, and we actually had about 30 songs, and I actually have about 20 songs recorded professionally from 45 years ago. That last year I put up on Spotify and Apple Music, so you can actually go listen to them. The band's name is The End, and like I said, many many songs. I also did while I was in the band, we did a Beatlemania show to generate the money to do professional recordings. So we traveled all over the Northeast doing a Beatlemania show. I was George, the shy one, but I play electric guitar. Worked at a bank. I was out of the band. I got into commercial real estate. Also, I'm a preacher. I preach on a Sunday mornings at a retirement center. My brother converted me back in the day, about 30 years ago, and best move I ever made. And I've always wanted to give a little back, so I'm an elder at my church. I counsel people, and I do many other things too. I own some real estate, and I develop real estate. My professional experience is fixing broken assets, retail assets. So it has been a journey, and it's been a lot of fun. And I failed many times, and I guess the reason why I call myself part of the reason my New York Forrest Gump is that Forrest owned a shrimp boat, but I owned an oil tanker in the Caribbean. I lost a lot of money on that Caribbean, but it was a very unique experience. I learned a lot from it, and I guess one of my elevator pitches that all my stories are true. So I guess that's kind of the true Forrest Gump pitch. So anyway, you can start anywhere you like. I can give you plenty of stories about all of those things. And when it comes to mental health, I have been diagnosed as bipolar, and which is probably why I have so much energy. I'm on the manic side most of the time, and I found that uh, I did take me many years through very, very deep depressions to finally go to a doctor and get on medication. So I now consult with people and advise people, especially as an elder at the church, and I counsel people because I've been there, so I can be kind of effective at that. And I do tell people to go get checked out, get on medication. There's nothing wrong with that, nothing embarrassing about it. Some of us have imbalances that need to be corrected. I went on medication and I haven't had a depression in 20 years, but I've kept most of my manic side. So I guess that's what makes me overly productive. But I can certainly speak to that too. So anyway, I'll let you pick on whichever one you want, and I'll give you some great stories about any one of those chapters of my life.
So talk about the lowest point in your career, but because you say your failures are just as important as your success. So was the oil tanker the lowest point in your career, or was it something else?
Well, I'd say the oil tanker was the biggest lesson in uh, listening to others instead of guiding my financial wealth myself. Although it was everything it becomes comical, after you survive. But I had a friend of mine that convinced me that this would be a great venture. And I went in and I put a lot of money into it, and it ended up not being a great venture. It was very risky. I probably shouldn't have done it, but I'm a risk taker and I'm an entrepreneur, and that's what entrepreneurs do. But I learned that if I'm gonna be an entrepreneur, I should be the one controlling the enterprise and not allowing or leaving it up to others to control it. But I don't think that was the worst. That was just the biggest loss, probably. I'd say some of my biggest difficult times was, well, when I got out of the rock and roll band. I decided to leave the rock band at 30 to try to salvage my first marriage. My marriage was falling apart, and I was feeling pretty down about myself. But it's funny when you have difficult times in your life and you have your biggest failures, you realize that sometimes that's God opening a door for you that you would have never walked through if you hadn't been down on your luck. And I guess that's one of the best lessons about being down and being somewhat defeated in the things that you do. I spent years in the rock and roll band, never went to college. All of a sudden, I'm 30 years old and the rock and roll business is not working out for me. What am I going to do for a living? Have I made a mistake? I'm at 30 years old. You really can't start all over. And I decided to look inward, consulted with my brother, who's a preacher, and he guided me through the scriptures and said the most important thing in life for you, Kevin, right now is to get right with God. And I did do that. And then from there, oddly enough, he said to me, your second most important thing is to get out of that rock and roll band and try to work on your marriage. And I did. I quit the band. But the third thing that was interesting during that same conversation was my older brother Mike introduced me to a fella in his church who was a very wealthy, established real estate developer. And he introduced me to him and said, maybe he'll take you on and maybe he'll give you a job. And I never thought that would occur because I had no college. I've always been very good with numbers and very good with people. And I come to realize that to be successful in real estate, it's not about how much college you have. It's that people like doing deals with people they like. And if you're good with people and you're honest and you're good with numbers, that's all you need to be successful in real estate. And this gentleman took me under his wing, taught me the real estate business, trusted me, trained me, and that's how I became a very successful real estate broker and developer. And it was out of the ashes of of I guess, ruined dreams of thinking you're going to be a rock star, which probably isn't a great life anyway. But when you're young, you think it is. And hitting rock bottom, that I turned to God, listened to my brother, and ended up having the best thing that ever happened to me, which was connecting with a guy who gave me a great job and gave me an opportunity to show that I could make something of myself. And since then, it's been ups and downs, losses and lessons, but always thinking positive and being uphill. Met a wonderful woman, married her, got three beautiful kids. Yeah, I've had some things where I've lost a lot of money. I've also made a lot of money. The key is to not make it about the money. It's about the journey. That's what I learned. It's all about the journey, failing and growing and sharing and improving my life and other people's lives. It's more important than stacking up the treasures, if you know what I mean.
Well, let's talk about your time as a city commissioner.
Well, that was an interesting thing because when my wife and I decided after we got married that we wanted to move south, we lived in New York, and my wife wanted to homeschool the kids. And in New York, it's expensive, and you had to both work. So we moved to Florida. I had an opportunity to open a regional office for my real estate company, and I took it. And then we moved to Florida, and I'm a big bass fisherman, so I've loved being in Florida in the sunshine and fishing. So I took a job, moved down to Florida, and ended up buying a house in a beautiful town called Sanford, a historic town, Sanford, Florida. And I'm a very community oriented guy, and my next door neighbor was the city commissioner, and I met him, and he said, we could probably use a guy like you to help out in the city. So he put me on a board. It was just a citizens board kind of thing, not an elected position, but I got interested in public service, and I really wanted to, give back to the town. And eventually, I became he appointed me onto the planning and zoning board because I was a real estate professional at that point. And I was on the planning and zoning board for 9 years. And when he retired, I ran for his position as an elected official, a sitting commissioner in Sanford. There was five of us, a mayor and four commissioners. So I ran for the commission and I got elected. And it's funny because you know my background was with no college and being a street kid from Queens and a hippie and a rock and roll guy. Who knew that I would end up being a city commissioner? And which was the most exciting thing for me was that my poor parents, they thought I was smart and I should have a great job. I should be a doctor or a lawyer. Meanwhile, I was a long-haired hippie and never went to college and was in a rock band. And it was very disappointing to my dad, I must say. But when I became a city commissioner, my dad showed up at my swearing in, and I got to tell you, he was never prouder than he was so proud of his son, the elected official. I remember getting my first piece of mail at the city, and it said, it was addressed to, I forgot the way they worded it. It was very interesting. Addressed to, the Honorable Kevin Hypes. And I said, who's that? And then the girl at the front desk said, that's how they address elected officials, the honorable. I was like, you got to be kidding. I kind of thought that was pretty cool. But it was a great thing to do because I added something to the commission, being a real estate professional that some of the other guys on the board didn't have. So I helped round out the commission. I helped, chart the course for the city with development and creative ideas, with helping the city. It was a very a rewarding position. It was a lot of work while working a full-time job, but I really enjoyed it. And I went on from there to move to a different town called Oviedo, where I live now. And I ran for mayor in Oviedo because I became a community guy. And I didn't get elected, but it was a lot of fun running a campaign and doing those things. And so those are great stories, great memories. And I think, I think where I've been, I've added something to the communities, which is a very rewarding, even though it's not a high pay. It's funny when you're an elected official on that level, which is the town and city level, you don't get paid very much. I think you get like ten to $12,000 a year. It's just really a stipend. It's not a full time position. You just not making a salary in politics until you're up on the, I guess, on the the congressional level or state representative level. And even then, they don't make a lot of money. But on the local level, you don't run for the money. You run because you want to help your community.
Let's take a quick break.
Okay, everybody, it's Michael E. Cullen II.
And I'm Sesame and Carta from the All Too Real 2 podcast. We're passionate about movies, TV, and pretty much all things pop culture.
Dive into the chaos of failed sitcoms, direct-to-video sequels, and the quirky realms of cinema and TV.
Join us every Thursday for your dose of All Too Real 2 entertainment.
We'll guide you through debates like whether Howard the Duck qualifies as a superhero.
Ponder if Larry the Cable Guy could be the new Rock or Schwarzenegger.
Discover if some shows and movies should have stayed in the cutting room.
Ever heard of a sitcom featuring that dictator with the funny mustache? Well, we watched it.
We're dedicated to unraveling the peculiarities of pop culture, sometimes with awesome guests.
So, if you're into the eccentric world of pop culture,
listen and subscribe to All Too Real 2.
Available wherever you find podcasts
and on Age of Radio.
Well, as you and I both know, the real estate industry can be intimidating. So talk about what's one of the myths that you would like to break wide open for listeners about the real estate industry?
Well, it's interesting because when you say intimidating, you're right. When I first got into the real estate, when I got that job with that developer, all of a sudden I'm showing up in an office with a suit and tie. I had to go out and buy suits, and I'm sitting in an office with all these Harvard grads and guys like that. And here I was, a hippie with a rock and roll background. It was very intimidating. I just assumed that these guys were far more smarter than I was, and that I didn't know how I was going to somehow measure up and do a good job. But what's interesting is that I learned after a few months of spending time with these guys that, they knew a lot more about college football and about golf than I did. And they knew about all the college, groups and frat houses and all that. But they really weren't any smarter than me. I was very good with numbers, and I was a very likable guy. And I think in many ways I was smarter than most of them. And I didn't know that in the beginning. I had a lack of confidence. And because I had never been in the professional world, so to speak, I just assumed they were judging me and that I wasn't very smart. But you should never do that. God gives everybody special skills and talents. And he never puts you in a situation that you can't get out from under it. That's scriptural. So I just want people to know that they should really realize that we're all special. We may not be the same, but we're all special. God gives us all very special gifts. And there's no one else that's better than you are. They may be different, or they may be better at a certain task than you are, but they're not a better person than you are. As long as you're honest and you work hard and you're willing to learn and you're willing to fail and try again and keep pushing forward, you'll probably get ahead of most people, no matter what kind of college they got, and really no matter how smart they are. And that's what I learned. And I've been a very hard worker. I outperformed most people because I always thought I had to, because I didn't have that college degree. And I think it really gave me a leg up at the end of the day. So real estate's been very good to me, but I worked hard for it, and probably worked twice as hard as most of the people around me because I had to prove myself. But there's nothing wrong with that because I benefited from it.
Well, let's talk about, I know that you're very candid about mental health. What are some of the lessons that you wish business leaders would learn when it comes to mental health and resilience?
Well, I can tell you this, my personal story, and I didn't realize I had a mental health issue. Back in the 70s, which was when I got my first big depression. I didn't know what it was. It was like all of a sudden I was always a very positive, happy, kind of guy. And all of a sudden one day I felt this black cloud just come over my head, and I didn't know what it was. And then I started hearing voices kind of telling me that, you're a good talker, Kevin, but you're really not a very good person. But you've got everybody fooled. All the people around you, you're such a good talker. You've got them convinced you're such a quality guy, but you're not. And it's odd. I don't know how depression hits other people, but that's how it hit me. Uh, and I was just devastated because I just could not get those voices out of my head. And that black cloud hung over my head for probably 2 or 3 months, and I didn't know what to do. But you see, back in those days, in the 70s, depression, going to a doctor, getting medication, that was for wimps. Real men didn't do that. They didn't. They stuck it out and toughed it out, and just held it back and got over it. Well, it took about 2 or 3 months before that cloud started to pass, and all of a sudden the sunshine came in again. And I said, "Wow, whatever that was, I'm glad it's gone." And I really didn't give it another thought until probably a year later, a year and a half later, it happened again. Now, this time around, I still didn't get any help because it was still, macho men don't get help for mental issues. It's just a depression. Everybody gets them. I'll get through it. And since the first one passed after a few months, I just hunkered down and waited until this one passed. Well, this went on for years, 30 years. About every 2 years, I would get a deep depression and I would just hunker down and wait it out until it passed. Until one day, when I was 50 years old, it was so bad and I had so many balls in the air because it was probably stress related that I just had a mental collapse. I ended up in the hospital. And only then did I actually get the help I needed and got diagnosed. And that's when I found out I was bipolar. I was always so incredibly productive and so manic most of the time that I could outwork anybody. But every once in a while, the depression side of that bipolar would hit, and I'd be down for the count for 2, 3 months at a clip. So I guess where I would go with this is that first, it's up to the individual to recognize that they need help. And to go to a doctor and get diagnosed and get on medication if that's what you need. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with sharing that with your HR people if at your job or with your family. You should always share it with your minister, your family, or an HR person, because the last thing you want is to do something that's going to hurt your family or that you'll regret, like kill yourself or something like that. And I came very close to doing that. Fortunately, it didn't happen for me, and I got the help I needed. But I would like to tell the professionals that are out there who maybe have employees that struggle with this is that, you know, they're not bad people. Their life's not over. They're not broken people. It's just a chemical imbalance is all it is. And if you get on the right medication, you're 100% again. And what happens is it becomes a stigma. And I felt like I wasn't good enough to hold down a good job anymore, that maybe I was broken. And I found out that I wasn't, that I was very blessed in many areas. And that all I needed was the right medication. And the hardest part for people that have a mental disorder of some kind is not so much recovering, it's getting back into the workforce. When you have a collapse like that and you're out of work for 2, 3, 4 months in a hospital someplace or going to some sort of a deep therapy place and you got to take time off, when you try to get back in the workforce, all of your friends are looking at you like, where have you been? You've like fallen off the face of the earth for the last 4 months, Kevin. Where you been? Well, what do you say? Well, I had a mental collapse. Excuse me, I don't want to talk about it. It's very hard to get back on the horse. That's the hardest part. So the best thing is for companies is to welcome people back and realize that if they get the right medication and they get the okay by their doctors, that they can be very productive people again and probably fixed for life. I haven't had a depression in 20 years. But for the first 30 years of my life, I didn't take any medication. What an idiot. I wish I would have realized sooner that all I had to do was get diagnosed and I could have been fixed. But in the 70s, you didn't do that. So I want employers to know that the people that have mental disease in some ways, or shapes, or form are not broken people. They're very productive people once they get on the right medication. And for those of you who have a mental disease or a mental disorder of some kind, there's nothing to feel guilty about. It's not you. It's just a chemical imbalance. Get it fixed and get back on the horse and get back to work. You can be a very productive person again.
Well, let's talk about your book. Let's talk about the hardest story that you had to put on paper and what you want listeners to take from it, and tell us where we can get the book.
Okay, well, the book is called Book of Me, The Life and Times of Kevin Hipes, the New York Forrest Gump. And I guess that's a little comical, but it is kind of true. And I think if they ever did a sequel for Forrest Gump, it ought to be with a New York guy, because last time it was a Southern guy. I think that's a pretty good angle, actually. But I call it that because I've lived many different situations, and I found myself in very interesting situations, kind of like Forrest did. And quite frankly, he was kind of an autistic guy while I was bipolar. So, there's a lot of similarities there. The stories are completely different. The difference is, though, that my stories are absolutely true, and Forrest Gump was kind of a made-up story. So I think reading my book will help a lot of people see themselves in many of the stories, but will also see the things that God brought me through where I could fail and be successful. Um, there is ups and downs in the book. Most of the stories are very funny and they're very short. It's just 67 chapters, but most of them are 5-10 pages, easy read, and they're all stories. So they start, a middle, and there's an end after every chapter, and it's usually a pretty funny, interesting story. So you'll find many of the stories very humorous. A lot of them are decade type stories. Like, I lived in the 50s, I lived in the 60s, I lived in the 70s. I was a hippie, I was in a rock band, 80s, 90s. So it's like a Forrest Gump thing where you've got those decades. But I've had some difficult times. Probably the most difficult time in my life, other than struggling with bipolar, was at 16 when I was a hippie kind of thing and long hair and did a lot of drinking with my buddies. I went on a camping trip and my best friend fell off a cliff and died. And that my doctors told me that may have been what triggered those depressions, because I was 16 then and got my first depression probably within a year or two after that. That was the most traumatic experience in my life. He was my best friend. I knew his family. His dad was the football coach. It was a horrible, horrible experience. And I, of course, felt guilty because he and I were drinking on a cliff near a waterfall. And we crashed on the rocks. And when I got up, he was gone. And I thought he went back to the campsite. Well, he didn't. He must have got up in the middle of the night and stumbled off the cliff. He fell 300 feet to his death. A horrible situation. But you gotta pick up and keep going. So I had to come through that. That was the most difficult time of my life, probably. Uh, but life's full of ups and downs, and God puts us through things for a reason. And I'm not saying that there was a reason for that death. That was just irresponsibility on our part as kids, basically. Uh, but at the end of the day, the book has many, many real life stories, many failures, many successes, and it does focus on the fact that at a certain point in time, I turned my life over to the Lord, and my life then became about serving Him and about helping others. And I think God brought me a lot of successes because my focus then became not about making a lot of money for me. It was about taking care of my family, but helping others be successful. And that's a lot more rewarding than having a lot of money in the bank. So anyway, that's kind of in a nutshell. I have a YouTube channel. It's called Planet Hypes, and my name is spelled with an Hipes. And I actually wrote the book through a series of videos that I did on a YouTube channel because I don't have the patience to sit still long enough to write a book. So I recorded 70 videos of me telling my life stories into a camera. It's kind of comical. People tell me I'm a very animated guy on camera. And I had it downloaded to a manuscript, and that's what made the book. So, well, if you're not a big reader, then go to the YouTube channel. But I'd rather you got the book, because the book gives more detail, and I'm proud of the book. And you can get that on Amazon. Just type in just type in Book of Me, Kevin Hypes, and it'll come up. You can get it for $6.99 on Amazon as an ebook, or you can buy the paperback, or you can buy the hardcover, which is expensive, but it's got full color pictures. And I have a lot of pictures in the book of me, everywhere from 5 years old all the way up to 70. So I think it's a worthy read and a good gift. So I would love to have folks check it out and then maybe email me or put a note on my webpage. Webpage is planethypes.com, and check out my webpage. You could buy the book there too.
Tell us about any upcoming projects that you're working on that listeners need to be aware of.
Well, I'm a busy guy, and being bipolar, especially being manic, keeps you busy. Which for me, I call it my superpower, to be honest with you, because I've licked the downside of the depression with the medication, but I've kept the upside with the right medication. So I'm still quite manic, not in a bad way, but in a good way. So my story is interesting, and it's interesting enough that I had somebody out in LA read the book, and they loved it. So I signed up with a group out there called Voyage Media, and we're in the process of developing a TV series based on my life story. They're writing a script, and I'm going to do what they call a podcast, which is going to be like an 8-episode mini series of my life story, and they will use that podcast to maybe pitch my story to like Netflix and Hulu and groups like that. So I'm excited about that. And listen, if it doesn't go anywhere, that's fine. I've just got that much more to hand down to the kids, when I'm old and gone. But I'm excited about it, and I'm hoping that that will go somewhere, because I do think my story has enough merit to brighten the lives of many people. So it'd be great if it hit TV or even a movie. Who knows? So keep an eye out for that too.
We'll throw out your contact info so we can keep up with everything that you're up to.
That's the truth. And the contact info, like I said, is just Planet Hypes on the YouTube channel, or planethypes.com at the webpage. Or again, just go to Amazon and buy the book, and I got a lot more information there.
All right. Final closeout question. Give us some final thoughts and close it out with this. What is the first blunt piece of advice you would give somebody who might be suffering from a failed business or a bad career move or just burnout?
Okay, this is a good question. I'm glad you asked it. One of the first things I learned from Scripture is, probably the smartest thing you can do is be close to God. That helps with every failure. But what I learned from Scripture was a passage in James chapter 4, verse 6, and it says that God opposes the proud and gives grace to the humble. And what I learned from that was that I said, why do I, and why do many people, most people, why do they fear doing things? Why do they stop themselves from trying new stuff? Well, most people stop themselves from getting better or trying new stuff because they're afraid of failure. They don't want to fail. Why? Well, they don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want to be humiliated in front of their friends. So they just don't do it. They don't try. They stick to what they're comfortable with. That's not the way to grow and to become successful. So what I learned from that passage was that if I'm a truly humble man, it's impossible to be humiliated. You can only be humiliated if you're prideful. That hit me like a ton of bricks. And I said to myself, you know what? Life is short, and I'm going to heaven, and I shouldn't fear anything. So from that day forward, I decided that I was going to do everything I'm afraid of, keep doing it until I'm not afraid of it anymore. And that's how I've been living my life ever since that day. And I got to tell you, I failed at many things. It doesn't matter. I learned from it. I got back up and I tried again, or I dropped that and went to something else. And it turned me into this guy who's got all these stories, who's learned a lot and has really become very successful, not so much monetarily, although I am financially successful, but more as a person, to have a positive influence on other people, to do great things for the kingdom of God, and to know that I'm living a full life. The way I say it is, life is about the journey. It's not about making a lot of money. Once you make a lot of money, you got nothing to do but worry about losing it. But as long as you're climbing that hill and you never get to the top, that's the place you want to be. Always on the journey, striving upward. That's when life's exciting. So there it is.
Absolutely, ladies and gentlemen. Check out everything that Kevin is up to, and hopefully he does get that series on TV so we can check it out. Follow, rate, review, share this episode to as many people as possible. If you or someone you know would like to become a guest on the Living a Dream with Curveball podcast, or you have any feedback or suggestions for the show, please visit www.curveball337.com. Thank you for listening and supporting the show. And Kevin, thank you for all that you're doing to make the world a better place, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much, Curveball. Great to be on.
For more information on the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, visit www.curveball337.com. Until next time, keep living the dream.